From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. NBA owner denies Uyghur genocide. Linda Sarsour, other activists arrested on U.S. Capitol steps as Senate debates voting rights reform. U.S. website for free at-home COVID-19 tests is live. Pegasus software used against dozens of female Middle East activists. Desperate Afghans line up for free bread as poverty crisis deepens. Nigeria unveiled mega rice pyramid in Abuja. Our top story tonight. The NBA has been drawn into the controversy over China's genocide of Uyghurs. Chamath Palihapitiya, part owner of the Golden State Warriors, dismissed concerns over human rights abuses facing the Uyghur minority. While discussing politics on his show, the All In podcast, Palihapitiya said nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs, okay? He called human rights a luxury belief. Co-host David Sachs attempted to clear the air by arguing that people care, just not as much as other issues. Sachs also tweeted that he donated to Save Uyghur, a campaign advocating for Uyghurs run by the Muslim American human rights organization Justice for All. Palihapitiya himself is a genocide survivor as his family fled the persecution of Tamils in Sri Lanka. More than 20 activists were arrested on the steps of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. as the Senate began debating voting rights reform. The Reverend Darrell Wade, who started a hunger strike along with other activists on January 6th, called on Congress to pass two major bills broadening voting access. He said it's time for the filibuster to die. The activists were arrested as groups were prohibited from demonstrating on Capitol grounds.
Democracy is in crisis. Today we are out here demanding that the United States Senate pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. It is a shame that in a country that claims to be the greatest democracy on earth, that claims to be the greatest nation on earth, that there are still people who are fighting for access to the ballot box. Every day, Republicans and even some Democrats are banning or trying to figure out ways to suppress Black, brown, and poor people from the polls, and we're here to say absolutely not. In honor of Dr. King this week, we are here to fight for voting rights.
I would pray that my grandchildren and their peers would not have to fight for freedom and democracy. And without free elections, without voting rights, we don't have freedom, we don't have a democracy.
U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Democrats face difficult odds as the chamber began debating the House-passed voting rights legislation Tuesday. GOP leader Mitch McConnell accused Democrats of fake hysteria over the right to vote. Schumer said if Republicans continue to obstruct the long-delayed voting rights package, he would move to bring back the filibuster for just that legislation. Meanwhile, the Political Action Committee Emily's List said it will no longer endorse Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema as she holds firm on the filibuster. Indivisible, a movement of progressive advocates, is asking followers to call senators and tell them to hold the floor. On Tuesday, the U.S. House Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot subpoenaed documents and testimony from Eric Trump and others. It subpoenaed the legal team that pursued conspiracy-filled lawsuits on behalf of former President Donald Trump that claimed fraud in the 2020 elections. Among those compelled to testify are Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer and ringleader, Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, and Boris Epstein. Ellis drafted a memo on how Trump could overturn the election by exploiting an obscure law. Powell's organization raised millions based on false claims that election machines were rigged. Epstein pursued allegations of election fraud in Nevada and Arizona. He also participated in a call with Trump on the morning of January 6th, discussing options to delay the certification of election results. Every U.S. household is now eligible to order and receive 4 free COVID-19 tests to be shipped by the end of the month, according to a federal website. The Biden administration's website allowing people to order the free at-home kits went live Tuesday, a day ahead of its formal launch. More than 700,000 people have visited covidtests.gov. The U.S. Postal Service is handling the orders. Meanwhile, World Health Organization Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus warns the pandemic is far from over and urges people to stay vigilant. Global equities gained in the last quarter of 2021, climbing 5.8% in the S&P Global BMI, according to Seeking Alpha, a crowdsourced content service for financial markets. Sharia-compliant benchmarks, including the S&P Global BMI Sharia and the Dow Jones Islamic Market World Index, outperformed their conventional counterparts. This was by about 2.5% in the quarter, largely due to their overweight in the U.S. information technology sector, which gained nearly 14% during the fourth quarter. Global Islamic indices finished the year with nearly a 2% advantage. In contrast, the Asia-Pacific developed and emerging markets underperformed their conventional benchmarks. Dozens of women journalists and human rights activists in Bahrain and Jordan have had their phones hacked using Israel's Pegasus spyware, according to a new report. The report by Frontline Defenders and Access Now is the latest in a growing public record of Pegasus's misuse globally. The spyware has been used against dissidents, reporters, diplomats, and members of the clergy. Its creator, Israel-based NSO Group, in November was placed on a U.S. trade blacklist. Apple filed a lawsuit against the company in November, trying to stop its software from compromising its operating systems. Facebook filed a similar lawsuit in 2019, alleging the company was hacking its WhatsApp messaging service. Right-wing Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik is seeking release on parole, saying he has distanced himself from violence and terror. Breivik has served 10 years after killing 77 people in Norway in a terror attack. While making a Nazi salute in court, he blamed others for his crime.
Jeg gjennomførte ikke hans 22. juli. Det var ikke jeg som gjennomførte angrepet. Jeg var radikalisert. Det Blood and Honor som bærer det fulle ansvaret for 22. juli. Jeg ansvarlig for at jeg ble radikalisert. Det jeg. Og jeg bærer delvis skyld.
In his manifesto, Breivik quotes American Islamophobe Pamela Geller and hails India's Hindutva movement. He devotes 102 pages of the 1,518-page document to India, citing websites of Indian paramilitary group RSS and allied groups. The shooter, who killed 51 worshippers at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019, referenced Breivik as his inspiration for his terrorism. 1 million rice bags stacked in 15 separate pyramids were unveiled during a ceremony at Nigeria's Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industries. The rice was planted in 2020 and harvested by the Rice Farmers Association of Nigeria from states under the Anchor Borrowers Program. The harvest is expected to help ease food supply problems in the country. Farmers returned the rice bags in exchange for cash to repay their loans under the program. Nigeria's central bank last year released $1.92 billion to farmers and reduced interest rates on loans in a bid to stimulate food production. The country's northwestern states, the agricultural heartland, have been in the grip of years-long violence between nomadic herders and farmers.
This government has a good plan for us. We have to pray for this government. Not even I feel to pray for this government, to support this government. Because the government lost Nigerians, lost farmers supporting us.
20 people were killed in coalition airstrikes on Yemen's rebel-held capital Sana'a, sources told AFP Tuesday. The strikes came after insurgents launched a rare and deadly attack on the United Arab Emirates. The UAE is part of the Saudi-led pro-government coalition fighting rebel forces. Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels claimed a drone and missile attack on UAE's capital Abu Dhabi earlier this week, killing 3 people and wounding 6. The retaliatory coalition airstrikes hit 2 houses, leaving them in ruins. They targeted Houthi camps and headquarters in Sana'a, Saudi Arabia's state-owned Al Akhbariya TV tweeted. The Houthis have carried out repeated cross-border attacks against Saudi Arabia. In the early morning hours, Muhajira Amanullah rushes in freezing temperatures to a modest bakery in the Afghan capital Kabul to await the distribution of warm naan bread. On some days, it is all her family and others in line will eat for the day. The mother of 2 told AFP on Tuesday that without the bread, her family will go to bed hungry. Afghanistan is in the grip of a humanitarian disaster. Jobs have dried up and many government workers have not been paid for months. The United Nations warns that half of the nation is threatened with food shortages. The bread distribution launched Saturday is part of the Save Afghans from Hunger campaign organized by a Kabul University professor. Our situation has been bad like this for almost 1 or 2 years. Before this, I used to find some bread and water. Ever since my husband became an addict, our life has been destroyed. Things became so bad that he even said that he would take our daughter and sell her. I started to cry and said, I am left with nothing except God and my kids. If you sell them too, then my life will be pointless. I would not allow him to sell my daughters. This is how bad my life is. The municipality of Jerusalem has ordered the demolition of a compound in the Beit Zafafa neighborhood, housing a mosque with a new golden dome. The move comes after pressure from right-wing groups. Court documents filed Wednesday show the municipality is seeking the demolition because a floor was built without a permit. The Ar-Rahman Mosque was built before Israel's founding in 1948. It is being renovated and expanded as donations come in from locals and Arabs living in northern Israel. The structure has a highly visible gold-plated dome. It is nothing like the famous Dome of the Rock in the Old City, which is adorned with 5,000 gold plates financed by the late King Hussein of Jordan. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the ongoing voting rights campaign, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. There are countries where dictators get 100% of the votes. Well, Egypt is one, Syria used to be one, but people have stood up asking for democracy, freedom, and Islam, and they wanted voting rights. That is a struggle we have gone through in this country. But instead of people claiming 100% of the vote for themselves, they still want to have election, except some people can vote more freely. Other people will have to sort of stand in line, maybe 9-10 hours, and maybe not vote. To discuss what is going on in our country, with me is someone who is fighting for the poor people's movement, which is not only for our rights for the poor people and the homeless, but also liberating our country from the fear, hate, and anger of the people of color. We have Reverend Galen Scott Hagler, who is a senior minister at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ in Washington, D.C. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, brother. Tell us this. What in the world is happening to our right to vote? Are we going to have some vote?
Well, it's a continual struggle. We're really in a crisis right now. And if you can think about it in terms of historically in the United States, you know, it started out that really originally only property owners could vote. White property owners could vote. Then it was expanded to other people, other whites being able to vote. Women and that was white men. Women and black people and people of color were basically denied the vote. And the whole struggle around voting rights was exactly that, to have influence over the process by being able to vote your representatives. Well, that happened after the Civil War to some extent, where one person, one vote was enforced after the Civil War in the South. And you had over 2,000 black people, black men, elected to offices in southern United States that had basically denied the enfranchisement of blacks previous to that, which only began to show what the power of being able to vote really meant. Well, that did not last too long. Reconstruction was dismantled in the country, and there was a constitutional crisis in 1876 in the Tilden Hayes election that was thrown into Congress. And there was a compromise that was made that Hayes would go to the White House and become president. But as a part of that compromise, Hayes had to agree to withdraw the last remaining Union troops from the South, and did so, with the Supreme Court going hand in hand throughout the years in terms of reversing the things that had happened to readmit states into the Union. And as a casualty of that process was voting rights. And basically people were denied the right to vote. And you had basically white Southern politicians, white Northern politicians that were in office while denying others the right to vote. That's a part of the history of this country.
What stage of history are we in now?
Well, I think that we're in another period of Reconstruction where they're trying to dismantle the vote, trying to limit people in the right to vote, so that basically those despots who are basically selected to safeguard a reprehensible system of white supremacy are basically running for office and trying to deny others the ability to vote. Because one thing that happens that we've seen in this last presidential election, when people vote, there are things that happen that do not allow despots and dictators and demagogues to be happy. And that is when people vote, they turn out of office those people that are damaging to the country. And so what we're dealing with state after state is all these state houses basically passing restrictive voting laws to make sure that people are not able to go to the polls and exercise a constitutional right.
How hopeful are you about the American democracy? It slowly moves in the right direction, but right now pretty fast moving in the wrong direction.
Well, remember we just celebrated here in the United States the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And the country always likes to resonate with the I Have a Dream speech because they can basically manipulate that and twist it into something that it was not. But the I Have a Dream speech was to mobilize forces to get a Voting Rights Act passed. And that happened in 1963. The Voting Rights Act was passed was proposed in 1964, and it was enacted in 1965. And so what I'm getting at, there's always been a struggle at the federal level to get Congress to protect the right to vote. Congress continues to renege on that. What we're dealing with right now is you're hearing people talk about, well, it should be left up to the states. It should be left up to the states. Well, that is the old Jim Crow argument. That is also the slavery argument in this country, that whether a state was a slave state or a free state should be left up to the states. Well, that becomes problematic because you end up having bastions of conservatism and bastions of hatred. And basically you have states that have been nurtured in a kind of backwards kind of politics that needs to be challenged, should be challenged. And the only way you challenge it is that you make sure that people have the right to vote.
Why there are no liberal Republicans when we got a couple of conservative Democrats who don't want to let the voting right bill pass?
Well, one thing that happened under Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. With the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, basically white politics was rooted in the Democratic Party. And it remained rooted in the Democratic Party that we refer to as Dixiecrats, really up until the Civil Rights Act and also the issues around Fannie Lou Hamer and other folks planting themselves in the Democratic Convention, that there was a mass exodus of whites from the Democratic Party into the Republican Party, and that was solidified under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, who went down to Mississippi, to Meridian, Mississippi, to declare his candidacy. And you got to ask, why would you go to Meridian, Mississippi to declare your candidacy. It's not a major media market. Well, it's where the civil rights workers were killed. Slaughter, Cheney, and Goodman were killed. He went down there signaling that this was, again, a part of the Southern strategy and basically solidified whites in the Republican Party and the Republican Party becoming more and more pronounced around white supremacy. And therefore, it moves towards its natural conclusion now. You have the Republican Party under Reagan that sort of have dressed up its racism in tones that sort of sound a little bit logical, that sounds not so violent. And then you end up having a Tea Party that pushes the Republican Party even further to the right. And then in the aftermath of the Tea Party, it moves towards its natural conclusion with MAGA, Make America Great Again, that pushes it even further to the right and even more loud in terms of white supremacist tenets.
So do you think that trend of the Republican Party just moving towards the white supremacy will continue in the near future?
It'll continue in the near future until there is something that exposes the contradiction and blows it up and make people run in the opposite direction. But right now, a big part of America are afraid of people of color. They're afraid of the change that has taken place in the United States. One thing that helped to spearhead this push to the right was the election of Barack Obama. Because for a lot of people, they really felt that the presidency was synonymous with white people. And when Barack Obama got elected, it was for a big part of the country. It felt that the train had gone off the tracks. And therefore, someone like this Trump was able to come along with all of his demagoguery, all of his racism, and basically harness the power and the strength of that conservative aspect of the party and use what dictators use all over the world, which is groups of people to shout, groups of people to threaten to take lives, all of those types of things, to shout you down in order to terrorize the people who are not necessarily that far to the right, but now are too intimidated to speak up and act up until it's exposed as being the dictatorship that it is.
Well, that's what the extremist minority in France brought the revolution. An extremist who didn't have a majority vote was Hitler's party. So the minority solidified with lots of guns as well. Tell me about this. Do you fear civil war?
Well, to a great degree, I feel that we're in the midst of a civil war. And to some degree, it's actually been a shooting civil war already, because we saw the types of things that have happened in terms of like Ahmaud Arbery's killing down in Georgia, those types of things. The young man getting off in Wisconsin, coming across state lines with an assault weapon in the middle of demonstrations that were taking place, and shooting 3 people and doing no time. All those types of things have really pointed to the fact that possibly we're in the midst of a civil war right now. And in fact, a lot of the entities that actually look at countries around the world and look at the markers of what leads to a civil war has basically said the United States, where it is right now, basically fulfills all of those markers that suggest a civil war.
Reverend, we may or may not get anything passed from the Congress. Even the congressional leaders are saying that. So in the absence of a congressional action, in the absence of a fair election, what the people's movement, poor people's movement, is planning to do?
Well, I think that the reality is the movement that has happened in this country historically has always happened in the streets, because basically Congress is a reactive body. It eventually reacts to that which takes place in the streets. Politicians are reactive by nature and basically respond to what takes place in the streets. And I think that what we really got to do is intensify efforts in the streets, demonstrations, the kinds of pickets the kinds of things that are going on right now, from hunger strikes to pickets to demonstrations, those types of things have got to be heightened in order for us to be taken seriously and to folks to understand that we mean business. That one thing that we do know is that unless the country changes, the country will not survive.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Hegler, for your time in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much. Blessings.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.